in October of 2018 when the Fab Four was breaking up. People didn't know it yet, but I was hearing about it at the beginning of October. They were going to Australia for their big tour, and somebody on their staff actually found Meghan designing a logo for their new foundation that she had already named. This was in October of 2018. And about a week later, the Sunday Times broke the story,
Oh, I
technically.
have breaking news for us. Harry's at Clarence's house right now.
All right. It, it
So
happened.
it happened. So you heard it here a day late because this will air tomorrow, but we did get to it. He's at Clarence.
Well, and as they say, I'll bet dollars to donuts that Camilla's in the room.
Kinsey Schofield here. Welcome to Crown and Conflict, a series dedicated to dissecting the most riveting royal stories in history. With insight from world-renowned royal experts, we explore the stories that shook the monarchy and captivated the globe. This week, I'm excited to welcome Sally Bedell Smith, the best-selling author of Elizabeth the Queen, The Life of a Modern Monarch, and the voice behind Royals Extra on Substack. Together, we are remembering Queen Elizabeth, which you've actually written several books about Queen Elizabeth. So if somebody is curious, there is an entire library out there. I just wanted to focus on this one book just so that I had a little bit of rhythm. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah, she shows up.
Yeah.
She shows up in the Diana book. She shows up in the King Charles book. She shows up in the George VI and Elizabeth, her mother and father. So she's a constant presence.
She is, and she deserves to be. Before we begin, the headlines are once again dominated by the clash between Prince Harry and the royal family. He's in the UK right now. I wanted to ask you about Prince Harry trying to force this half in, half out royal lifestyle with the latest visit to the UK. Um, which honestly, if I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you brought this to my attention. I sat back and viewed it all as a PR exercise. I want you to love me the way you used to love me. I'm going to remind you of why you fell in love with me. But when you look at what he's doing, it's in direct conflict with what Queen Elizabeth said around the Megxit agreement. You can't be half in, half out.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Well, absolutely. I think if the Queen were alive, she would be profoundly irritated, if not angry, that Harry is indeed this week violating the spirit, if not the actual technicalities of the agreement. Um, the Queen was adamant that you are either in the royal family doing royal duties, committed to service, or you're out and pursuing your commercial life. But you can't be out there pursuing, having TV series and writing explosive books and then come back in when you feel like it, just when it suits you to do a few royal style, people have called them pseudo royal events. When you feel like it. And she said, you're in or you're out. And if you're out, we wish you very well. We hope you have a happy life, but you no longer carry the HRH. You still have your Sussex title. You are still Prince Harry. Your children, well, she didn't say it because it didn't happen until after she died, but their children are Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet. Um, so they have those little perks, but she was very firm that they had, they had to be one or the other. And I was looking through my notes actually from January of 2020, and a friend of mine was telling me about someone who was there because they were just having their normal life at Sandringham. They were having shooting weekends, and all their friends were coming to visit. And then suddenly this crisis emerged where they had to have the Sandringham Summit. And there was somebody there who was a big businessman. And the Queen said, we're going to have a conference call with Canada, with Meghan in Canada. And what should I do about that? And he said, don't do it. You can control the people who are in your room, but you have no idea who is in the room with Meghan. And that's the reason that Meghan was not in on the discussions, which she, greatly resented.
That is so fascinating because I remember that exact moment in the Netflix docuseries where she's looking at the camera talking about how angry she was that decisions were being made about her while excluding her. And there's just a little bit of it. I mean, I understand that she's married into this family and this is her husband, but there's a little entitlement there. This is a very important institution. It's about
Yeah.
than you. So the fact that she wanted to go and complain on international television on Netflix about being excluded, I always thought, I'm glad, thank you for sharing that with me, because I always thought that was so clever of the family not to allow,
Yeah.
because she could have secretly recorded it, which we've seen them do.
Yeah. It indicated that mistrust had already begun.
Oh,
I mean, the Queen, didn't even realize what the implications were. And it took somebody who was savvy to say, no, no, don't do that. You could be putting yourself in jeopardy.
thank goodness she listened to that advice. I have kind of described this as like what appears to be a redemption tour where Prince Harry does want us to see him as the old royal. But his team has been teasing a commercial venture that belongs to him that we're supposed to hear about in the near future. So is it fair for him to try to, I mean, if you think about the fact that there's a commercial venture on the way, it really does feel like he's trying to bulldoze the royal family into allowing this half in, half out, or at the very least, try to bamboozle the media so that they will continue to treat him in a royal fashion.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the other things that when I was getting ready for this was in October of 2018 when the Fab Four was breaking up. People didn't know it yet, but I was hearing about it at the beginning of October. They were going to Australia for their big tour, and somebody on their staff actually found Meghan designing a logo for their new foundation that she had already named. This was in October of 2018. And about a week later, the Sunday Times broke the story that the Royal Foundation was going to be split in half in 2019. But you do get a sense when you know that Meghan was she was engineering this very early on. This was, a year and a half before Megxit. And so it just is a little window into the way she was calculating things, even back then.
You're so sweet. Like, I like that you say engineering. I'm over here thinking scheming. And you're just like, oh, hey guys, I want to take a second to tell you about a brand I really, really love. I know you've heard me talk about them before, but obviously, I'm not done telling you about Peak. They're reimagining wellness with science-backed tea crystals and superfood blends made with the cleanest ingredients. Everything they create is designed to make daily rituals simple and effective, whether for gut health, radiant skin, steady energy, or just feeling our best. For me, hydration was always tricky. I drank plenty of water, tried different electrolytes, and even the right very expensive skincare, but still had dry skin, brain fog. And you know what I'm talking about? Like sometimes I bet you could see me in interviews, like searching for words. The brain fog drives me crazy and trouble sleeping. That changed with Peak's deep hydration protocol. In the morning, I take BT Fountain, the beauty electrolyte. It hydrates from within, smooths skin, and gives steady energy. At night, I wind down with RE Fountain, the calming electrolyte, which has a form of magnesium that melts tension and helps me sleep deeply without waking up groggy the next morning. What I love most is how clean it is, no sugar, fillers, or artificial flavors, just ingredients like lemon juice and beetroot. Within a week, my skin looked more hydrated. My focus was super sharp, and I just felt better. I want to give you the opportunity to give it a try. I've got a special link in the show notes. It's 20% off for life plus a free gift with my link. It's peaklife.com/Kinsey. That's PIQUE life.com/Kinsey. I didn't prep you for this question and I apologize, but your thoughts on you have Hollywood connections. You have I think you're a very worldly woman. What is your thought
Thank you.
on what is your thought on the outcome of With Love, Meghan? We've seen season two not take off as much as season one. And the reality is, season one was likely morbid curiosity mixed with influencers looking for ways that they could parody it. Do you think that Netflix is happy with the product they delivered? Because we initially heard they were just so happy with the Harry and Meghan documentary that Harry and Meghan could create a couple of duds and they would
Yeah,
tolerate it. But I don't know if you can
I
tolerate this anymore.
I mean, I haven't looked at any of the statistics, but I mean, based on some of the early returns, it sounded as if people were just losing interest. I mean, look, we're now what, a week out, and nobody's really even talking about it anymore. I mean, I had to grit my teeth and watch the whole thing. But it wasn't even a second series. It was, as quite a few people have called it, part B, because it was all filmed together. And I mean, I thought it was even less interesting than the original one, and it didn't make top 10 lists anywhere, whereas the first one did. And so I think, I cannot see a future for it. I mean, it's not really aspirational. Um, I was at one point completely bewildered by the wildly expensive kitchen equipment she was using and thinking, how could anybody use this?
Right.
I mean, how can anybody relate to this? And the recipes I thought were either, kind of pointless or just difficult. We want people like Ina Garten who will tell us how to make really wonderful meals that are simple.
Yeah.
But Meghan isn't that. I mean, the other thing that kept striking me when I was watching it is she kept saying, I don't know, I didn't want to count because I lost count, but I'm doing this for the first time.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're doing a cooking show and you're doing something for the first time. I mean, people like Julia Child would test recipes over and over and over again to make sure they were going to be um, good.
Right.
I just thought that was, well, the much used word inauthentic.
Mhm.
Um, I just couldn't quite believe that that was the case, that this was something she was doing for the first time.
Yeah. I mean, or market the show. Well, first of all, yes, to your point, was she really doing this for the first time? And if not, like if she really was doing it for the first time, market the show as a duchess doing something for the first time, even though I hate
Yeah.
that. I hate that she's a duchess. But we are supposed to believe that she's this expert that's teaching us how to live, how to pursue joy. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you're not an expert, if this is the first time you're stumbling
I
on
know there's some basic contradictions, I think.
exactly. Everybody's going to be talking about this over the next week or so. Do you know what we should look forward to? Do you think there's anything special for President Trump's upcoming state visit? It's a tense time in the world, and
Yeah,
we know that
very.
he's a fan of the royal family. So I feel like he's going
Is he ever?
to.
Well, I mean, I think they're going to pull out all the stops from the king and the queen and the prince and princess of Wales on down. They will all be there. Um, you have to remember that Charles has known Donald Trump for a long time. He first met him in 1985 when he and Diana were in the United States for that very famous tour where she danced with John Travolta in the White House. After that, they went to Florida for a big fundraising ball and they met the Trumps, then Ivana, And then 3 years later, Prince Charles went to Palm Beach for a charity polo event. And guess what his very first stop was?
Oh,
Mar-a-Lago.
how interesting.
Charles arrived at Mar-a-Lago in 1988 with a motorcade and, police and outriders and everything. And he went to Mar-a-Lago and he had tea with Donald and Ivana, and they had various house guests like Estee Lauder and Betsy Bloomingdale. So Charles knew him in this, excuse me, speaking of motorcades, there's one going by my house right now. It's probably the vice president who lives up the street.
Oh,
Um,
I love this. I love this. A little behind the scenes.
in other words, he goes way back. I think whatever Charles may think of Trump's policies and his politics, what he knows above all is that Donald J. Trump adores the royal family. Donald Trump's mother was born in Scotland. He can't say that over and over, enough. He said the Queen reminded him of his mother. And, and so I think Charles is savvy enough that he knows what he needs to say to him, how he needs to stroke him, or what buttons he needs to push. And I think they'll do everything they can to make him feel welcome and to reinforce the evident love that he has for the royal family.
Yes, I remember him saying in an interview within the last few years that he had a hard time forgiving Prince Harry because of the way that Harry treated Queen Elizabeth.
Yes.
And so we know that Queen Elizabeth was important to him. She was important to us. If I've learned anything from your books, it's that so much of what we love about Princess Elizabeth at the time, then she becomes Queen Elizabeth, was from what she inherited from her parents. Take us back, Bertie and Elizabeth's love story. It almost doesn't happen. She turned him down not once, but twice before finally agreeing to marry him. In 1923, they tied the knot, and thankfully, they were in love with each other. They had this incredible devotion and trust, which proved invaluable when life threw them this curveball in 1960 or 1936. You
Right.
call it the marriage that saved the monarchy.
Well, it was because his older brother, King Edward VIII, was a truly terrible monarch. He was irresponsible. He drank too much. He partied too much. He didn't pay attention to his government documents. He was only king for 326 days. And the Foreign Office mistrusted him so much that they withheld documents from him. Um, and during this period, he threw the royal family into turmoil with this love affair with Wallis Simpson, who was a non starter. She had been divorced from two men who were still living. And that just he was never going to be able to be the king and make her his queen.
I also think we always talk about Wallis Simpson as a divorced woman, but she was also married when she starts this affair, which is also like, oh no, you can't do that.
Yeah, yeah, no, she was, and he didn't care, and all he was thinking about was himself. Um, and it was really fortunate that he abdicated to marry her because he was a Nazi sympathizer. He, had meetings with the German ambassador and signaled that he was in favor of Adolf Hitler. So I think probably even if Wallace hadn't come along, he would have done something that would have violated government policy, and he would have had to step down. But it took, Bertie and Elizabeth had to come in and pick up the wreckage. And not only did they do that, but they proved themselves to be admirable diplomats. They went to France in 1938, and they went to the United States and Canada in the summer of 1939, when it was actually kind of dangerous to cross the Atlantic. And they were just a triumph. And the relationship between the king and Franklin D. Roosevelt was established, and they set up some policies that would be carried forward once the war began, which everybody knew it would. Um, and and the most important thing, I think, was that they really understood the British people, and the British people really understood that Bertie and Elizabeth were dutiful and brave, particularly during World War II. Um, they were out and around, driving around London when the when the bombs were falling, and they were taking shelter in police stations. And it's really amazing. But Buckingham Palace was bombed 9 times during World War II, and they weren't living there. They were actually living in Windsor, but they were going into when they weren't traveling around the country. They were in Buckingham Palace every day. And on Friday, the 13th of September in 1940, as the Blitz was beginning, a bomb fell on Buckingham Palace and nearly killed them. I
Okay.
mean, they came very, very close to being killed, but they were undeterred. They traveled all over by train, and Elizabeth had a wonderful armored car that she called the Brontosaurus. and But you know, they never complained. They just did their duty, and um, they went out into the poorest neighborhoods of London and really everywhere, and spent so much time consoling people. And I mean, there was a moment after Buckingham Palace was bombed when she said, I can now look the East End in the face, because they were, nobody was immune, and they were being bombed as relentlessly as the poor neighborhoods on the south side of the Thames.
Wow. Well, do you think that the age that all of this happens for Queen Elizabeth, which she discovers she's going to be queen one day at age 10, do you think that age, and then when World War II happens and seeing her father and mother's selflessness and bravery, is it nice that it happens at this age? Because I mean, Princess Catherine would probably be one of the best ones to discuss this with because of her early years project.
Yeah.
But I wonder how much of her age had to do with how much she digested and recognized that, wow, these are important traits in my family and I want to inherit them.
Yeah, I mean, I think she said very famously, when she'd been on the throne for 40 years, she said, I have a feeling in the end that training is the answer to a great many things. And you can do a lot if you're properly trained. And I hope I have been. And she was, by her mother, by her father, by her grandmother, who, when Lilibet, as by the way, I'll just as a parenthetical, Lilibet called herself Lilibet before she was 2 years old. It was a name that only people in the family could use, not even her friends. And I can only imagine how upset she was when Meghan and Harry decided to call their daughter Lilibet.
So
Anyway,
annoying.
getting back to little Lilibet, at age 4, her grandmother, Queen Mary, had her there at a party for the wives of Indian princes, and when she was 12, and there was a meeting of the Polish foreign minister several months before the outbreak of the Second World War, there was little 12-year-old Lilibet at this table of all these adults who were trying to figure out how the British Poland Pact was going to be put into place. So, in other words, she was exposed to so much. she had it, she watched her mother and father carry out their duties. Her father showed her what it took to be a monarch. Her mother inculcated in her the values of loyalty and duty and steadfastness, all of which were and humility, all of which were very much a part of her character. And so she really was well trained. She was trained in constitutional theory by Henry Martin down at Eton,
Wow.
and the experience of living in Windsor Castle. She escaped from time to time, and they went up to Balmoral and they went out to Sandringham, but most of the time they were living in Windsor, and they had to go into those bomb shelters, and they had to listen to what her mother said was the whistle and scream of bombs, even though Windsor never got hit. But it was a constant in her life. On the other hand, one of her governesses said there was never an atmosphere of gloom and doom.
Mm.
They weren't walking around feeling sorry for themselves. They could only fill their bathtubs of about this far because there was a black line. They had, blackout shades. They didn't have very good food, and they just went along with it, and that really, really shaped her.
Oh, I mean, that tells me so much when I think about how different King Charles's upbringing was.
Yeah,
She really struggled, and I love to hear that she never felt like she did, that she just was going with the flow. You write about how at age 14 she gives her first public address during the BBC's Children's Hour, offering
yeah.
encouragement to children evacuated during the war. How much does that remind you of the Queen we saw sit down in front of the cameras during COVID, and just have that calm, that peacefulness?
Yeah,
It's like a warm blanket. Being
yeah,
wrapped in a warm blanket. She's telling
yeah.
we just we're going to come together. Eventually, just be patient. Everything's going to be okay. Almost.
Yes. And by the way, which is typical, she practiced very diligently. She practiced her breathing, she practiced her phrases, she even added a few phrases of her own, and her parents listened to her. And then she had Margaret sitting next to her, and she spoke for 3 minutes. And in a letter to his mother, King George VI, afterwards said she was not at all nervous and she didn't mind doing it a bit. Um, and there she was, a 14-year-old. Um, she was thrown into those kinds of situations at such an early age, and she just did what she was expected to do, and with it utterly uncomplaining.
Oh, she's precious. I've always loved the idea of her becoming the first female member of the royal family to serve in the armed forces,
Yeah.
training as a driver and mechanic. Do you know how this came about? And do you think that she'll be the first and the last?
I don't know. Well, certainly, as a monarch, he's the first and last.
Yeah.
But I mean, the first moment was when she turned 16 on April 21st, 1942. And her father made her a colonel of the Grenadier Guards, who were actually there in Windsor. They were the primary um, regiment that was guarding them. And so she was always having them to lunch and to tea. And but then she became their colonel, and she did the inspection in the little quadrangle up at Windsor Castle. And she was very exacting and very meticulous. She noticed everything. And this was a characteristic of the way she was for her entire reign. Whenever she did an inspection, she noticed if anything was out of place. And she took her military command, as the head of the armed forces. She took it very seriously, and she loved all the regiments where she served as colonel. And, that was just a very important piece of who she was and how she carried out her role.
That reminds me of your Substack article where you discussed her disappointment in Harry for being so willing to just let go of those
Yeah,
abandon those responsibilities.
yeah,
Lady Elizabeth Anson had shared with you that the Queen, it just had a hard time comprehending how he could just abandon
yeah.
such important responsibilities.
Yeah, because they were important. And you mentioned the other thing she did in World War II, which was in the spring of 1945 when she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service. But in that time, she learned how to drive a 3-ton truck, and she was just second subaltern Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor. And she wore the same uniform as all the other girls. And she had to salute to her senior officers, but she learned, there was a scene in the movie The Queen where the Range Rover got stuck and she knew exactly what was wrong with it. And, she really did know things like that. She knew how to bleed brakes and she knew how to change tires. She learned all that. And she said later, to a labor politician, she said, that was the only time in my life when I was ever able to measure myself against my contemporaries. And she loved, she got her face got grimy, her hands got grimy. But she said to another friend, she said, I never worked so hard in my life. And everything I learned was brand new to me. So it was very, very important for her to do something like that. I mean, one of the things that I discovered about her father is that he was a real man of the people. He was very comfortable with people from all walks of life, and they really appreciated that.
Um, I'm just curious to know if Prince Harry knows how to change a flat tire based on what you just said. I'd love to know if Prince Harry,
Ah,
like,
I wonder.
you know,
He probably always had somebody to change one for him. I remember, this is nothing to do with that, but it's kind of funny, which is a wonderful man named John Julius Norwich, who knew the royal family really well. Once said to me, I said, how is she so calm all the time? How is the Queen so calm? He said she never had to look for a parking place.
oh, that's hilarious. That's a very good point. I would probably be a very peaceful person too.
Right.
1947, Queen Elizabeth marries Philip Mountbatten, formerly Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. This happened November 20th at Westminster Abbey. But
Right.
I love the fact that she was like, had a crush on him since she was 13 years old. I want to believe
Yeah.
this is a love story. You know that there are a million historians out there that are sometimes cynical about it. Where do you land on this? I want to believe.
I land on it was definitely a love story.
It.
She was 13 and they went to visit the Royal Naval College at Dartmouth. And he was a cadet and he was in training. And I guess they had glancingly met before, but he was, as anybody who's seen the pictures, I mean, he was an absolute Adonis. He was 18 years old, so 5 years older than she. But Margaret Rhodes, who was one of her Bowes-Lyon cousins, and I got to know her pretty well. And she said, she never looked at anybody else. And the Queen Mother, then Queen Elizabeth, kept bringing these very prestigious aristocratic men who were in various guards units around to see if she could fix them up with her, and she would have none of it. She just only had eyes for him. And during the war, he was serving in the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean and later in the Pacific, and he would come to Windsor for visits, and they corresponded. And at the end of the war in 1946, he was back in London, and he was sort of a constant presence at Buckingham Palace. And they were by then very much in love, and he proposed to her at Balmoral in the summer of 1946, and she accepted immediately. She didn't even ask her father, but he said, "Well, just keep it secret." And after you turn 21 in April of 1947, we can announce it.
Oh, wow.
And so they were married the following November, and it was at a very, very bleak time it was a real bright spot for the British royal family.
I love that you said that it's truly a love story. I wonder if, because even as Americans, we are guilty of watching The Crown and eating it up, and even in The Crown, there's there are a few moments that make you go, huh? But I don't think that The Crown is as accurate as we wish it was.
No, definitely not in many ways.
Exactly.
Um,
You said that Richard Crossman, this is a politician, once told you that the Queen is deeply moved and tries to control her face, she looks like an angry thundercloud. Um,
you know,
this kind of is related to something you say in a timepiece in 2012 when you talked about the Queen's grandmother. Telling her about the way that she should pose, the way that she should smile. Um, what, how,
sit. She couldn't sit with her back against the chair. Well, that was her mother actually who taught her that.
so she lives her entire life following these rules, doesn't she? That
Yeah.
she listens to this guidance and she's dedicated to these rules her entire life.
Yes, and I think part of it was she didn't want to show partiality. I think she was afraid that she would offend somebody. I mean, I was sort of riveted watching her, it's at royal engagements and how she could hold that impassive look for so long. I mean, once she even called it her Miss Piggy face. I mean, she knew that her that her resting face was a little grumpy, but that was okay because when she did smile, it was so radiant. And after the deaths of her mother and her sister in 2002, everybody noticed that she was smiling so much more. And
Mm,
she really had a beautiful smile. And and so I think that that restraint sort of loosened a bit. I mean, she was, by definition, a much more unintroverted, but she was a restrained person. I have in my mind's eye this moment when she was in the United States in Washington for a state visit for Bush 41, and they took her out to a housing project where they were building houses for low income people. And she went into one and she met the woman who had no idea what protocol was about. She stuck her hand out. She said, "Hey, how you doing?" And then she gave her an enormous hug. And you could see the queen was just sort of rigid with her hands by her side because she was not naturally a hugger when it came to strangers
right.
until she was released. Now, Charles is a big hugger.
Yeah.
Camilla's a big hugger. William's a big hugger. They're all huggers now.
Yeah.
Um, but the queen was not.
I'm glad you said that because Meghan also says that they're not huggers. Well, let's talk, if you don't mind. I wanted to ask you, what can you tell me about the Queen as a mother? Because we're seeing a lot of, at least over the last few weeks, and I disagree with it, but criticism towards Catherine and Prince William that they're not doing enough. Their children are on break. Allow them to be with their
Yeah.
kids. We really have seen Prince William and Catherine prioritize their children. And I almost think it's unfair because what they're doing is a lot of them are comparing Prince William to Queen Elizabeth. And Queen
Mhm.
Elizabeth was the monarch. She had a completely
Yeah.
different set of
Yeah.
responsibilities.
I mean, I think there's several things at work there. I think one is that he had such a disruptive childhood with all the fighting that went on between his mother and father, and he wants a normal childhood for his children,
Mhm.
and that's particularly important with George, who is going to be a future king. Um, but also, we have to remember that the Queen was 25 when she became monarch. Her son was 3, her daughter was 1. And she felt she had an obligation to show that she was a worthy monarch. And so she was torn between the motherhood and fulfilling her duties in a way. And remember, she was surrounded by the gray men, all these courtiers who were judging her. So it's not surprising that she spent a lot of time away from her family. I mean, Philip was nominally the head of the family, but again, she was not a demonstrative person. She had wonderful nannies. She had her own mother who was very affectionate, particularly to Charles.
Mm.
But as her cousin Margaret Rhodes said to me, the family is not set up to be cozy. And but that being said, when they went off to Balmoral or Sandringham, she rode, she taught them how to ride, she played games with them. I mean, at one point when the Queen was being criticized, Princess Anne said that it just beggars belief that she didn't care about them. Of course, she cared about them, but she also wanted them to be resourceful and to learn from mistakes. And, maybe she went overboard with Prince Andrew and indulging him a little bit. But, that was she. And they also had this kind of tendency that it was said of the Queen Mother in particular of ostriching. She if she saw some issues that she didn't want to have to deal with, she kind of averted her eyes.
Oh, well, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
That's why I have dogs with absolutely no discipline. Okay. You know
Right.
what? They're perfect.
Yeah,
They're
of
asleep.
course.
So can you tell me about the Queen's relationship with Camilla? Because I feel like there are differing reports there, but towards the end of her life, she was so gracious to tell the world,
Yes.
you can call her queen consort.
Yeah. And eventually queen, which
Yeah.
is what she was going to be all along. Well, when Charles had his first go round with Camilla, which of which there were several, that was in 1972, and the Queen didn't know anything about that. It was only in the late 70s when Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles's marriage started to fall apart because he was so wildly unfaithful. So she sort of gave up on him. And Charles had fallen in love with her in 1972. And although he wasn't ready to get married, he was crazy about her. And they got back together in like 1977, 78. And at that point, it was interesting. At that point, Andrew Parker Bowles was was an officer in the Blues and Royals Regiment, and some of the officers came to the Queen's advisors and said, "We're not very happy that the wife of one of our officers is sleeping with the son of the monarch." And at that point, um, the Queen banished Camilla from all royal events. And the Queen Mother did the same thing. And so that's the way it was for quite a while. And then after the marriage with Diana broke down and Charles and Camilla resumed again, they did it very much under the radar. It really wasn't until after the death of Diana in 1997, it wasn't until June of 2000 when Charles finally persuaded his mother to meet Camilla at a barbecue that he had at Highgrove. And as one of his advisors said, it wasn't really a breaking of the ice, it was a cracking of the ice.
Wow.
And from that moment on, Camilla was very gradually integrated into the family. You could see where she was seated for the Golden Jubilee in 2002, and then there were further family events where she appeared. But by the time they got married, and on April 9th, 2005, the Queen fully embraced her. She, the speech that she gave at the wedding reception was very warm and very funny because it had to do with a Grand National that was that was being run that day. And she said, "My son is home and dry with the woman he loves,"
Oh.
which was a sort of typical Queen way of saying it. And what she understood by then was that they were very well suited and that Camilla made him happy. And they were compatible, they were comfortable with each other. And she could look at the two of them and see that they had a very solid relationship. And that reassured her about the future of the monarchy.
Um, was it almost a blessing because I don't know if Camilla would have ever been allowed to marry King Charles having been divorced. I don't know. Was it almost a
Well, he
blessing?
was divorced by that time
Well,
too.
well, I
So,
mean, what
yeah.
I was going to say is, was it almost a blessing that Queen Elizabeth saw how toxic the relationship was with Diana, how manic Diana could be? Was it almost a blessing that she had seen that because then she was her
Yes.
eyes were open to see how good Camilla was for King Charles. Wow, this
Yeah.
is a completely different relationship. This is a woman that can support you. She doesn't want attention of her own, and she's mature and she's going to elevate you.
Age appropriate, I
Oh
think
yeah,
it's called.
so
I mean, there was 12 years between Charles and Diana, and that was, a chasm. And not only that, but they didn't have anything in common,
right,
really.
right.
Um, but what was always so interesting to me is, again, this is this tendency that they have to kind of avert their eyes. um, Diana was exhibiting some fairly alarming behavior early on. They thought it was pre-wedding jitters, post-wedding jitters, but it was far deeper than that. And but the queen just couldn't come to grips with the fact that there was something fundamentally wrong with the marriage. And it really wasn't until the Andrew Morton book in 1992, when she realized that, not only did Diana say a lot of terrible things about the monarchy and about Charles, but that she had actively cooperated with it, that she had lied to everybody about it. And so they completely lost trust in her. And even then, they thought, well, maybe they can rub along and still be separated. But obviously, when she did the Panorama interview, that was the end.
Yeah.
Um, but I think several people said, look, the Queen was kind to her. Um, she didn't kind of understand her. Um, but she, when Diana did damage to the monarchy, she realized that it just couldn't go on. And it was at that point that because for a long time, Charles just didn't confide in his mother and father. His friends knew what was going on, but you know, the Queen and Prince Philip really didn't until then,
Ooh,
in 1992. That was a long time.
that is a long time to hold that in and have to deal with.
Yeah,
Um, I want to ask you, this feels like a silly question. I say I have
there's
written,
nothing. There's no such thing.
well, thank you. So I have written, if you were to write a book about the Queen all over again from scratch, how important is Meghan Markle in the Queen's history? And I feel like if you asked me this, I'd be like, not at all. But the reality is, if you read your Substack and you read Royals Extra, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, they really disrupted the Queen's final years. And so while I want to say she's not very important at all, I don't even know if I'd include Meghan Markle. I mean, I feel like so my question to you is, how important would Meghan Markle be to your book about the Queen? Because those last few years were so destructive, and it
Um,
breaks my heart knowing how much the Queen gave to other people that she felt potentially attacked towards the end of her life.
yeah. Well, because, I mean, the Oprah interview was when she was still alive. And that was when she said the royal family was racist, and a lot of other really damaging things. So, I mean, she would obviously, yes, I think it would have been um, really great to be able to write about her last 10 years because of all the challenges and the bravery and what she managed to do despite what we now know was infirmity in her last couple of years. But I think I would look at Meghan as having cast a real shadow over her last few years. I've sometimes thought about an alternate scenario. What if they'd been really dutiful, um, committed to the royal family people? They had been happy in Frogmore Cottage. They were living in the most secure place, probably in the world, in Windsor Home Park.
Mm-hmm.
And if she had been sensible, as Sophie Wessex, now Edinburgh, was, getting to know the Queen really well, listening to her wisdom, I mean, she would have become a better person. Meghan, I'm talking about, she would have been able to make a huge contribution to the monarchy, to Britain, to the world. Um, yeah, she wouldn't have had as much money, she wouldn't have had as much celebrity, but she could have lived as a really good person. And wow, what an opportunity to have just sat with the Queen and listened to her experiences and her views of all the people she had met. And I mean, it would have had to be some sort of novel to write the good outcome. But look, the Queen had many people who loved her. Edward and Sophie were absolutely invaluable to her in those last years. And she, developed a much closer relationship with Charles and William and Kate. I think Catherine gave her a great deal of happiness. She had a solid relationship with her daughter Anne, and Andrew was the problem child. And I think he and Harry and Meghan were the three blights on her final years.
That's so disappointing, but I love the way you described the happiness that other members of her family brought her, because that does give
Yeah.
some comfort to imagine Prince Louis rolling up, and all that energy coming at her. So, according to a 2012 Time Magazine article titled The Wisdom of Queens, which I found, you give Catherine advice based on your Queen Elizabeth observations. And I want to
Yeah.
revisit some of these suggestions because they're brilliant, especially looking on, over a decade later. So, you give her these 5 lessons: resist the lure of celebrity, maintain a constant public image, master official duties, embrace country life, and support Prince William without overshadowing him. I don't have to tell you who I immediately think of with half of that list. Resist the lure of celebrity. Let's start with that. The Queen Mother encouraged Queen Elizabeth to consider herself the vehicle through which this love for country can be expressed. This, like, this this humbled her. She did not think of herself as famous. She
Oh,
considered herself this patriotic figure, which I love. That you and I love the UK, and I think one of the reasons we love the royal family is the patriotism you see through trooping the color, through the pomp and ceremony. Talk to me about resisting the lure of celebrity, because Queen Elizabeth, Princess Margaret, we saw do the rounds a couple of times, but Queen Elizabeth was so good about just being this vehicle.
yeah. Well, there's a wonderful story behind that quote, and that was when the 27-year-old, very new queen, was going around on this huge global tour with Philip, and they were in Australia. And literally three-quarters of the Australian population turned out to see them. And back in London, the Queen Mother was aware of what Prince Philip called that level of adulation. And so she wrote a letter to Prince Philip, or no, she wrote it to the Queen, sorry. And she said, how moving and humble making that one can be the vehicle through which the love of country can be expressed. Don't you feel that?
Ah.
And so it originated with the Queen Mother, and and the Queen really took it to heart. She she understood what she represented, and that yes, people admired her because she was pretty and she wore beautiful dresses and all that and bling, and but basically she was the means through which they could express their patriotism and their love of their country.
That is so beautiful. Can you tell me, and this is another story that reflects how humble Queen Elizabeth was while still maintaining that leadership, about Lady Mary Clayton's 90th birthday
Yeah,
party in
I'm so glad
2010?
you found that. Lady Mary Clayton was one of her Bowes-Lyon cousins, and she lived. She was incapacitated. She was in a wheelchair for most of her life, utterly uncomplaining, and very modest. Lived in a really modest place. The Queen visited her a lot,
Oh,
and on her because it was very close to Windsor Castle. And on Mary Clayton's 90th birthday, her family had a big party for her. And they brought in somebody who did a caricature of everybody who was there. And it was up on the wall. And I looked at it, and there in the middle was the birthday girl, Lady Mary Clayton, very large presence in the middle, and tucked in the last row was the Queen wearing glasses. I love that. And she was just very almost inconspicuous. And I thought that, that was a sort of symbolic little moment
yeah, you're
that showed.
absolutely. You
I mean,
write
because
the queen has
she would,
shown this. You write the queen has shown this aspect of her character in subtle ways, arriving unannounced at the theater after the house lights have gone down, or blending into the background if someone else is being celebrated. I mean,
yeah,
by contrast, I hate to go back here again, but I know you've seen the headlines where people believe that whenever the royal family have something important to promote, up pops Harry and Meghan. Whether it's the king's important day in Canada. I don't even was Harry in Singapore? Did Harry do
yes, Harry, when he wants to go someplace secretly, he's able to do it.
yeah,
Who knew he was in Singapore?
exactly. So you talk about how the queen was she was the queen and still capable of being humble. I'm
Yeah.
so what a unique what a unique thing to be able to accomplish.
Yeah. And I think um, William has that humility.
Mhm.
And I think Catherine really has it. I think she has the ability to know that she is a regal presence, but at the same time, not to capitalize on that. And she just has an internal restraint and a humility that you see it in every single engagement that she has. She doesn't want to be in the forefront, and particularly when she's with William, um, without being obsequious or anything like that. Um, she knows that he's numero uno. He's going to be the king. She'll be the queen. But unlike Diana, who at every moment tried to outshine Charles, yeah, Catherine is very careful not to do that. And that
Well,
was one of the things that I advised her not to do.
exactly. So support Prince William without overshadowing him. Queen Elizabeth was by definition the center of attention from the moment she became queen, you write. To create
Yeah,
a dignified persona at a young age, she was instructed to stifle her smile in public. Wait,
yeah.
but what else do you see? Queen Mary, who wore this is my favorite part. I have this highlighted. Queen Mary, who wore a tiara to dinner every night, even when she
Yeah.
was dining alone with her husband, and who,
Yes.
towards the end of her life, touchingly said she wished that just once she had climbed over a fence. What cute details about Queen
Yeah.
Mary that I'd never even heard.
Yeah. She definitely did. And she had very strict ideas about how she should carry out her duties and how her daughter should. And I think, and by the way, she had a very rigorous approach to education, and so I think she was responsible for some very important elements of the way Princess Elizabeth was educated. She made her memorize poetry all the time because she felt that that was a good way of disciplining her mind, and she did have a very disciplined mind.
Wow.
She had a very good memory, and I think a lot of that had to do with the way Queen Mary gave her instructions.
I want to mention this, but you say stay with your look. It shows confidence and reassurance to the public. To a remarkable degree, the Queen maintained consistency in her appearance. And I was telling you before we started, I cannot find the way we blow up poor Catherine when she changes her hair color. Which we both disagree with, we thought that it was overblown and ridiculous. But I can't find the photo where Queen Elizabeth goes from her dark brown hair to white hair. She just magically transitions, and it seems like no one acknowledges it.
No, and I don't think I ever found one. And believe me, I combed over thousands and thousands of photographs when I was doing these books. Um, but one thing that I did note is that she almost took the approach of someone in the military to her clothing. She sort of had uniforms for every specific occasion. She knew she had to wear beautiful jewelry, and she knew she had to have gorgeously designed dresses. But there was a real consistency, the to the way she, particularly in the latter sort of 20 years of her life, she wore basically the same uniform all the time in different colors. But I think that was for her a way of reassuring people, and also it was very practical.
Mm.
I remember when she was out riding at Windsor with her horse trainer Ian Balding, and she was, as she did all the time, she was wearing her Hermes scarf, and he said, "Why, you of all people? You're the queen, you're the monarch, you should set an example. Why don't you wear a hard hat?" And she said, "But you don't realize I have to go to an engagement after this, and my hair has to look good." So she wore her Hermes scarf.
That's hilarious. You also mentioned earlier that in Diana changing her look, okay, we talk about how she's a fashion icon today, but the reality was at the time that her constantly changing her appearance, which if you read between the lines, you see her going to her hairdresser saying, I want to look like Sharon Stone. I want Sharon Stone's
Right.
haircut and things like that. It actually projected some instability and insecurity.
Yes, definitely. I think that shows she was constantly, I mean, my subtitle of my book was Diana in Search of Herself.
Mm.
And she just never had the confidence um, to stick with a look and make it her signature, as it were. She
Yeah.
was, and I think it was that basic insecurity that she had to keep finding new things.
Well, I don't know if she'd believe what an icon she is today. We saw Catherine at a rugby match this last week, and she had on
Mm.
an outfit that was very similar to Diana's. I feel like I do think she does this on purpose sometimes, not to the extent that Meghan Markle does. Like my girlfriend joked, Maureen Callahan joked yesterday that are we going to see Meghan in the Christmas special, stuffing a turkey with all of Diana's jewelry on because she's constantly the show. We've got all these jewelry on. Are we going to see her stuffing the turkey? What are your predictions for a Queen Catherine? You gave those incredible instructions over a decade ago. Katherine has followed them almost to a T, and they were so wise. You knew so. I mean, you were so ahead of your time there. What do you predict for her as a future queen consort? And do you think we'll call her queen consort, or do you think we'll call her queen
No,
too?
no, we'll call her. I mean, the Queen Mother was never really called the Queen Consort.
Mm.
She was the Queen.
Ah,
Camilla is called the Queen.
yeah.
When you become the Queen, you become the Queen. I mean, you are
Oh, I
technically
have breaking news for us. Harry's at Clarence's house right now.
all right. It, it
So
happened.
it happened. So you heard it here a day late because this will air tomorrow, but we did get to it. He's at
Well,
Clarence.
and as they say, I'll bet dollars to donuts that Camilla's in the room.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's so we've done a show with Hugo before. Hugo told me previously that the Queen liked to have someone in the room for protection with her when Harry
Yes.
and or Meghan were there because she didn't know what they were going to ask for. She didn't know, they always needed something or were trying to get her to agree to something.
Yeah.
And so she wanted protection in the room. And I said, I think I said it recently, maybe to Jeremy Kyle. I said, well, that's why Queen Camilla's there because
Yeah.
King Charles wants somebody there to protect
Yeah.
him. The famous quote from a few years ago, I'm not a banker, I'm not an ATM, when the Queen says, why aren't you taking Prince Harry's calls? Did you see the recent report that he'd sent her a cell phone? Prince Harry?
Yeah.
Do you believe that? I don't know. I've
I,
only
you know,
seen it.
I it maybe, but I mean, I think it's sort of ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think what he needs, what the king needs, is a witness,
Yes.
and Camilla's a witness who is very well versed in everything that has happened and has a very long memory about what Harry has said. And if Harry had a shred of common sense, he would take this opportunity to apologize. I know he said in that BBC interview, I have forgiven them. What has he forgiven them for? He was the one who attacked them
Yeah.
and
Betrayal is
betrayed and attacked them. I mean, if he could just put his pride in his pocket and say, I really apologize. I know I've hurt you, I've hurt the Queen, I've hurt William, I've hurt Catherine, and I hope you accept my apology. That would be the right thing to do. They deserve an apology.
oh my gosh. Years
He's upended the monarchy for several years.
and all because he didn't get his way. All because he couldn't
Yeah.
have his way. It just was like the world's most intense hissy fit that I've ever seen. Well,
Yes.
we'll have to sit back and wait. I think the king and his team will be incredibly disappointed if we get any details out of this meeting because it proves that Harry can't be trusted. So hopefully, if Harry's in his right mind, we wouldn't get any details from this meeting.
Right.
But
But we know it's taking place, which, I suppose was inevitable. Unless they want to issue a statement.
oh, a
That's
joint
another,
statement?
yeah, I mean, that's another matter. They may. I mean,
Mm,
I doubt it, but that's one possibility. Otherwise, little bits and pieces could leak out.
well,
Um,
what did you think of that meeting when the employees were conveniently packed outside of that
right,
strategy session?
right. And those things don't happen by accident.
Amen. Amen to that. All right. Well, if you are curious to read some of Sally's writing, you can stay up to date on your Substack, which is called Royals Extra by Sally Bedell Smith. And then type Sally's name into Amazon, and her whole list of books are available there. And start from the top and finish all the way to the bottom because they're all amazing. Agree with us, disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. And make sure you look up, because I just skimmed this, but make sure you look up the Time magazine article. The title is The Wisdom of Queens, and read what she wrote. This is all just inspiration for Katherine. Read what she wrote and think about how everything has come to fruition over the last 10 years. And you're
Yeah.
like, wow, this, you get goosebumps. So thanks so much for watching.
And in the face of a lot of adversity.
Oh my gosh, that we never
Yeah.
saw coming.